The internet had become dull. Every website seemed the same, every video predictable. Hours melted away as I scrolled, clicked, then scrolled again, searching for something, anything to catch my attention. That was when I found it. A link, buried deep in some forum, promising something different. Curiosity, a constant companion in my boredom, pushed me to click. The page loaded. It was stark black text on a white background. No fancy graphics, no flashing banners, just a single video player window and a chat box buzzing with messages I didn't bother to read. The video was grainy, showing a room that looked like a basement. Someone was there, tied to a chair. My stomach tightened a little, but I told myself it was fake. It had to be fake. This was the internet, after all. Beneath the video there was a strange system, little buttons each with a different amount attached to it, like on a betting website. "Participate," the heading declared. It all felt staged, like a twisted game show. Still, the seed of boredom was desperate for something to grow from. I saw a small amount, a very small amount, attached to a button labeled question. What could it hurt? It was less than the price of a fizzy drink. I clicked it. An anonymous identifier flashed on the screen, confirming my bet. The image in the video window flickered for a moment. The person in the chair, who had been still before, moved. They lifted their head. They looked directly at the camera. A chill, sharp and icy, ran down my spine. This felt different. The person on the screen started to speak, their voice flat, devoid of any feeling. They began reciting something. At first it sounded like nonsense, just random words strung together. But then a word jumped out. My street name. I froze. Impossible. It had to be a coincidence. There were lots of streets with the same name. But the voice continued, listing numbers. My house number. My heart began to race. This couldn't be happening. The person on screen kept talking, their voice unwavering, detailing more things. My school. The name of my form tutor. Things only someone who knew me, really knew me, could possibly know. Each detail landed like a punch to the gut, stealing my breath. Panic clawed at my throat. How could they know this? I hadn't used my real name anywhere on that site. My details were private. They had to be, the voice went on, describing what I was wearing. The old faded band t-shirt, the tracksuit bottoms with the ripped knee, the socks with holes in the toes, every single detail, accurate, perfectly accurate. It was as if they were here in the room looking right at me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the mouse, desperate to close the window, to shut it down, to make it stop. But I was frozen, trapped in place, unable to look away. The person on screen finished their list of details. Then they spoke one final sentence, their voice still flat, devoid of emotion, but somehow laced with something else now, something cold and knowing. Have fun with him, everyone. The screen went black. Complete, utter blackness. The silence in my room suddenly felt deafening. Every shadow in the corners of my room seemed to deepen, to twist into unfamiliar shapes. The air itself felt different, charged with something unseen, something unknown. A sound cut through the silence. A distinct, sharp sound that made my blood run cold. The sound of my doorbell. The rusty metal gate screeched as we pushed it open, a sound that ripped through the quiet air. The asylum loomed ahead, a monstrous shape against the dim sky. This place, infamous online, was our target for tonight. A challenge posted on the dark web, daring anyone to infiltrate its walls and live-stream the experience. Foolish bravado, perhaps, but the thrill was irresistible. We were not alone. A small group of us, faces illuminated by phone screens, moved as one into the grounds. The air changed the moment we crossed the threshold. It grew colder, damper, carrying a scent of decay and dust. The grounds were overgrown, nature reclaiming its territory in wild tangles of weeds and vines. The building itself was immense, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. Everywhere was silent except for the crunch of our feet on gravel and the whispering wind that seemed to carry secrets through the broken windows. We found a way inside, a shattered door hanging off its hinges, groaning in protest as we squeezed through. The interior was plunged into darkness, absolute and profound. Phone torches flickered to life, cutting beams into the gloom. Dust motes danced in the light, tiny swirling galaxies in the confined space. The silence inside was different, heavier, pressing down on us. It was the silence of a place long deserted, holding its breath. The main hall was vast and echoing. Peeling paint hung from the walls like strips of dead skin. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, and scraps of paper, remnants of lives lived and then abruptly abandoned. We moved cautiously, our footsteps making sharp sounds that bounced off the high ceilings. Each room we explored was the same, stripped, bare, desolate, whispering stories of neglect. We ventured deeper, into the bowels of the building. Corridors stretched ahead, disappearing into shadow. The air became colder still, biting at exposed skin. A strange odor, acrid and metallic, began to permeate the air. It was unlike anything we had encountered before, something chemical and unsettling. We reached a set of stairs, spiraling upwards into the dark. The wood groaned under our feet with each step, threatening to give way. As we ascended, a faint sound reached us from above, a low hum, barely perceptible but undeniably there. It vibrated through the floorboards, a subtle tremor in the stillness. We exchanged glances, a question forming in everyone's minds. This was not the silence of abandonment. The higher we climbed, the stronger the hum became. It was a steady, mechanical sound emanating from further within the building. We pushed on, drawn by a morbid curiosity, despite a growing unease. The upper floors were different from below. There was a strange orderliness here, a sense of recent use that contradicted the decaying state of the rest of the asylum. We turned a corner and stopped dead. A light spilled from under a doorway ahead, a thin, bright line cutting through the darkness. It was the only light source in the entire building. The hum was louder now, emanating from behind that door. Cautiously, we approached. The air grew colder still, a chilling draft that raised goosebumps on our arms. The metallic smell was stronger, almost overpowering. Hesitantly, one of us reached for the door handle. It turned with a soft click. The door swung inwards, revealing a room bathed in harsh, fluorescent light. It was a stark contrast to the gloom of the asylum. The room was large, sterile, and filled with equipment. Metal tables, strange machines with blinking lights, and rows of monitors displaying lines of code scrolled across the screens. It was a laboratory hidden deep within the abandoned asylum. Figures moved within the room, their backs to us. They wore dark clothes and masks that obscured their faces, their movements efficient and purposeful. They seemed oblivious to our presence, engrossed in their tasks. The hum originated from the machines, a constant low thrumming that filled the space. We could see cables snaking across the floor, disappearing into openings in the walls. This was not abandoned. This was active. This was something secret. A sudden noise from the doorway made the figures turn, their masked faces swiveled towards us, blank and expressionless. They stopped what they were doing, their bodies still, their attention fixed entirely on us. The silence descended again, broken only by the mechanical hum of the machines. The air crackled with tension, a sudden shift from curiosity to dread. There was no recognition in their masked eyes, only cold calculation. They began to advance, moving with a unified purpose, surrounding the doorway. We were trapped. Our live-stream camera was still running, broadcasting everything to the unknown viewers on the dark web forum. The light from the laboratory spilled out into the corridor, illuminating the masked figures as they moved in. The last image to be transmitted before the feed abruptly cut out was the ring of masked faces closing in, and the cold, sterile light reflecting off their blank masks. The message popped onto the screen. My full name was there, in bold letters, staring back at me. Underneath it were numbers that I recognized instantly, numbers no one should ever just send in an email. My home address followed, clear and precise. Then a link, a strange web address, unlike anything I had seen before. Curiosity, that dangerous thing, made me click. The page loaded slowly, revealing a dark design. Words in harsh lettering announced something sinister. Scanning downwards, my breath hitched. There it was, a photo. Me, snapped from somewhere, sometime, I did not know when. Below the picture, stark and brutal, were the words, active contract, and then the countdown. 48 hours. Panic seized me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. 48 hours for what? The cold dread spread through me, icy fingers gripping my insides. I read the words again and again, each time the meaning sinking deeper, colder. Active contract, my photo, the countdown ticking away. It could only mean one thing. Someone wanted me gone. Someone had paid for it. My mind raced, a whirlwind of questions and fear. Who? Why? Had I upset someone badly enough for this? I tried to think, to recall any recent arguments, any disagreements, anything that could have escalated to this terrifying point. My thoughts jumped from one person to another, each possibility more absurd and frightening than the last. Colleagues, old acquaintances, even strangers I might have brushed past without a second thought. Anyone, it could be anyone. The digital clock on the website ticked down seconds with cruel precision. 47 hours, 58 minutes. Time was slipping away. I needed to do something, anything. But what? The phone felt slippery in my hand as I considered calling the police. But what would I say? Someone has put a contract out on me on the internet? It sounded insane, unbelievable. Would they even take me seriously? And even if they did, could they find whoever was behind this in time? 48 hours was not long. I looked around my flat, safe, comfortable. It had always felt like my sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap. Every window, every door suddenly seemed vulnerable, weaknesses in a fragile shell. I got up and checked the locks, even though I knew they were secure. It was a pointless action born out of sheer anxiety. What good were locks against someone who hired professionals? My eyes kept darting back to the screen, to the countdown. 47 hours, 52 minutes. Each minute felt like a piece of me being chipped away. I needed to get away from here. But where to go? And who could I trust? Could I even trust anyone? If someone wanted me dead, they could be anyone, anywhere. The thought was paralyzing. I decided I had to leave the flat. Staying here felt like waiting for something terrible to arrive, but where? A friend's, my parents? No, that would put them in danger too, wouldn't it? Whoever wanted me gone would not hesitate to hurt anyone who got in their way. I was alone in this. I grabbed my keys and my coat, moving fast now, propelled by a desperate urgency, out into the hallway, down the stairs and into the street. The normal sounds of the city seemed different now, sharper, more menacing. Every car that passed, every person walking by, I scrutinized, searching for something, some sign, but all I saw were ordinary faces, going about their ordinary lives, unaware of the nightmare unfolding in mine. I walked quickly, not knowing where I was going, just needing to move, to escape the confines of my flat, to feel the open air. The streets became a blur of buildings and people. My mind raced, still trying to make sense of it all, to find a reason, a name, anything that could explain this. But there was nothing, just a blank wall of fear and confusion. Hours passed like this, a frantic wandering through the city. I avoided busy places, sticking to quieter streets, always looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed, watched. Each shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every unfamiliar sound made me jump. Paranoia wrapped around me like a shroud. As darkness began to fall, the city lights came on, painting the streets in artificial colors. It made everything feel even more unreal, more dreamlike. A terrible dream I could not wake up from. The countdown flashed in my mind. 42 hours, 37 minutes. The time was still slipping away. I found myself in a park, drawn there without conscious thought. The trees loomed against the twilight sky, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. The air was cooler now, carrying the damp scent of earth and leaves. It should have been peaceful, calming. But there was no peace for me. Only the gnawing fear, the relentless ticking clock in my head. I sat on a bench, hidden in the dim light, watching the few people who passed by, families walking dogs, couples strolling hand in hand, teenagers laughing. They were all oblivious, living in a world where such things did not happen, could not happen. I envied them their ignorance. The park grew darker, emptier, the shadows deepened, stretching and twisting into frightening shapes. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me tense, ready to run. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if unseen eyes were on me, tracking my every move. I got up and moved again, unable to stay still, unable to shake off the feeling of imminent danger. I walked through the park, then back into the streets, a ghost drifting through the night. Sleep was unthinkable. Food was out of the question. All that existed was the fear, the countdown, and the desperate need to survive. The night stretched on, endless and terrifying. The city slept, but I could not. I kept moving, changing streets, doubling back, trying to lose any possible pursuers. Though I had no idea if there even were any yet, it was all anticipation, dread, waiting for something unknown to happen. As dawn approached, painting the sky in pale colors, exhaustion began to set in. My legs ached, my head throbbed, my eyes burned, but the fear kept me going, adrenaline pumping through my veins, pushing back the fatigue. 36 hours, 15 minutes, still so much time left, and yet it felt like no time at all. The first rays of sunlight touched the buildings, chasing away some of the darkness, but not the darkness inside me. The world outside seemed to wake up, to stir with the sounds of a new day. But for me, the nightmare continued, unrelenting. I found myself back in my neighborhood, drawn by some irrational impulse, some desperate longing for familiarity, for safety, even though I knew there was no safety there anymore. I kept my distance from my building, watching it from across the street. It looked the same, ordinary, unsuspecting. But I knew the danger was there, lurking, waiting. Hours turned into a day. I existed in a strange state, neither awake fully nor asleep, just running on fear and adrenaline. The city went about its business, oblivious to the silent hunt taking place in its midst. 24 hours, 49 minutes, half the time was gone, and I was no closer to understanding why or who or what I could do. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, lengthening forms. Another night was coming. The thought filled me with cold dread. Night was when bad things happened, when darkness concealed danger. Night was when the countdown would reach zero. I walked again, aimless and lost, through streets that felt increasingly hostile. Everywhere felt unsafe, every stranger a potential threat. The paranoia had become so intense it was almost a physical pain, a constant squeezing in my chest. As twilight descended once more, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found myself standing outside my building. Why had I come back? Was it some kind of morbid curiosity, a desire to face whatever was coming on my own terms, or simply a lack of anywhere else to go? I looked up at my window, dark and empty. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had been inside, safe and unaware. Now everything was different, broken, tainted by fear. The countdown in my mind flashed again. 12 hours, 32 minutes. The end was getting close. A sound from the alleyway beside my building made me freeze. A soft scrape, a rustle, something shifting in the shadows. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. They were here. They had found me. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, ready to run or fight or I did not even know what. The sound came again, closer now. Something was definitely there, in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the light. I could feel it, a presence, unseen but real, watching me, waiting. The alleyway remained shrouded, concealing whatever lurked within. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. I stood frozen, caught in the beam of some unseen hunter, the countdown echoing in the silence. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and then nothing more. The job advert appeared on a screen I should not have been looking at. Bold letters promised unimaginable sums for basic coding skills. My rent was overdue, my fridge bare, and hope, a fading flicker. Clicking the link was impulsive, desperate, a gamble with unknown stakes. The instructions were simple: download the software, complete the test. Lines of code swam before my eyes, familiar yet alien in this shadowed space. Hours passed, marked only by the glow of the monitor. Then a message: accepted, your assignments await. The initial jobs were easy enough: decrypting scrambled files, tidying messy code, erasing digital trails. Each task came with prompt payment, more money than I had ever seen. The anonymity was part of the appeal, a clean break from my mounting debt. I told myself it was just computer work, lines of code and logic, detached from the real world. The instructions were precise, impersonal, delivered through encrypted messages that vanished after reading. There was a cold efficiency to it all, a machine-like process that felt distant from human hands. I worked late into the night, driven by the money and a strange pull I couldn't quite name. Then the tasks shifted. I was asked to create fake documents, manipulate timestamps, fabricate email exchanges. The requests became less abstract, more pointed. One assignment involved constructing a digital trail that pointed to a specific person, framing them for data theft. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. This was no longer simple code. This was about real people, real lives. A knot tightened in my stomach. I completed the task, the money instantly appearing in my digital wallet. The ease of it was unsettling. The next job was worse. I was instructed to bypass security systems, not for data, but for access. The vague descriptions hinted at physical locations, buildings, homes. The software I designed was meant to disable alarms, unlock doors, create pathways for unseen individuals. A cold dread seeped into me. This was not just framing someone, this was facilitating something physical, something dangerous. Images flashed in my mind, news reports, crime scenes, shadows in the dark. I typed mechanically, my mind racing, my heart pounding against my ribs. The tasks were becoming increasingly sinister, each one a step further into darkness. I started to feel like I was being used, manipulated, trapped in a net of my own making. I considered stopping, closing my laptop, deleting the software, vanishing. But the thought was immediately followed by a colder one. Could I? They knew who I was, my details, my location. The anonymity was theirs, not mine. The efficiency with which they operated, the sums of money involved, hinted at something vast, powerful, unseen. Quitting felt not like a choice, but a foolish fantasy. I was in too deep. The jobs kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. Hacking into surveillance cameras, creating diversions in digital traffic, all geared towards unknown ends that felt increasingly violent. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by a constant gnawing dread. Every notification, every encrypted message felt like a tightening noose. The money was meaningless now, a dirty weight in my account. I was just a tool, a cog in a machine I did not understand, but whose purpose was becoming horrifyingly clear. The screen glowed in the dim room, reflecting in my tired eyes. Another task arrived, detailing a complex system, a web of security measures to be breached. The instructions were stark, devoid of emotion, just lines of text on a screen. But behind them I sensed something else, something cold and relentless, a presence that stretched beyond the digital realm. The final task was to disable a specific alarm system in a residential building. The address appeared on the screen, a street name, a house number. It was close to where I lived, just a few streets away. The thought sent a jolt of ice through me. I stared at the address, a growing sense of horror gripping me. I knew that street, those houses. These were ordinary homes, people living ordinary lives. What were they planning? What was this leading to? My fingers trembled as I began to type, the lines of code blurring through my fear-filled vision. The system was intricate, complex, but I worked quickly, driven by a desperate urgency I could not explain. My fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting commands, bypassing firewalls, disabling protocols. The task completed, the money appeared as always instantly, but this time there was no satisfaction, only a hollow, echoing dread. I stared at the screen, the empty message box, the blank cursor blinking. Then another message appeared, just one word. Confirmed. A moment later, the lights in my room flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. Outside, I could now distinguish a new sound. It was the piercing shriek of alarms, very nearby, growing very loud, very quickly. The box arrived sooner than expected. A plain black cube, no markings, sitting on my doorstep. It was cold to touch, even through the cardboard. Curiosity, mixed with a strange sense of anticipation, pushed me to drag it inside. Ripping open the tape, I expected the gadgets I had ordered, but the sight inside made my stomach lurch. Instead of electronics, nestled in ice, were plastic pouches. Not just any pouches, but pouches clearly containing things that should be inside someone, not packed in my delivery. My breath caught as I recognized the shapes, a kidney, a liver, maybe even a heart. A wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. This wasn't my order. This was something terribly, terribly wrong. My mind raced. Who would send this? Why me? The anonymous seller from the dark web, known only as Nightingale, was supposed to be discreet, untraceable, but this wasn't discreet. This was monstrous. Panic started to bubble up, hot and frantic. I needed to report this. The police. Someone. But before I could even reach for my phone, a ping. A message flashed on my laptop screen, the one I used for those secure, hidden corners of the internet. The message was stark, simple, terrifying. We're coming to correct our mistake. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mistake? This wasn't a mistake. This was a nightmare, and they were coming. Who were they? The sellers? People who dealt in this? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I spun around, peering out of the window. The street seemed normal, quiet, ordinary, too ordinary. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car sound made me jump. The feeling of being watched pressed down on me, cold and heavy. I needed to think, logically, but my brain felt like a scrambled egg. My hands were shaking as I tried to close the black box, to hide the awful contents. The icy chill emanating from it seemed to seep into the room, making the air colder, making the shadows deeper. Every creak of the house, every tiny noise amplified in the silence. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. The message, "We're coming!" It was so direct, so certain, no question, no plea, just a statement of intent. They knew where I was, they knew about the box, and they were coming. The thought repeated in my head, growing louder, more insistent. I had to get rid of it. The box, the organs, get it out of my house. I grabbed the box, the cardboard now damp and weakening. It felt heavier than it should, a leaden burden. I staggered to the back door, fumbling with the lock. My fingers were clumsy, numb with cold and fear. Finally the door swung open, revealing the dark garden, the overgrown bushes looming like dark shapes. Where could I put it? The bin? No, too obvious. Buried? I didn't have time. And the thought of touching those things again. I dragged the box into the garden, shoving it behind the thickest bush I could find, hoping it was hidden from the street. It was a pathetic attempt, I knew it, like hiding my head under a pillow and thinking the monster would vanish. But it was all I could think of. Back inside, the house felt different. Wrong. The silence was no longer just silence, it was a waiting silence, a listening silence. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every corner to darken. I switched on every light, flooding the rooms with brightness, trying to push back the encroaching dread. But the light felt weak, ineffective against the growing coldness in the air. I paced, unable to sit still. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything. Escape? Weapon? There was nothing, just ordinary household objects that suddenly seemed useless, flimsy defenses against whatever was coming. The clock on the wall ticked, each tick sounding like a hammer blow in the quiet house. Time was passing. They were getting nearer. I looked out of the window again, peering into the darkness. The streetlights cast long, distorted shapes, turning familiar objects into menacing figures. A cat darted across the road, its eyes gleaming yellow in the gloom. Even that small, normal thing made me jump. Everything felt heightened, amplified, terrifying. The sound came from downstairs, a faint creak like wood settling or something else. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, listening. Another creak. Louder this time, definitely downstairs. Not the house settling, something moving. My legs felt like lead, but I had to move. I crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness below. The hallway was shrouded in shadow, the faint light from the street barely reaching the bottom step. I strained my ears, listening. Nothing. Just the beating of my own heart, so loud it drowned out everything else. Then another sound. Not a creak this time, more of a scrape, like something being dragged. It was low, indistinct, but definitely there, and it was coming from the back of the house, from the garden, where the box... A wave of cold dread washed over me, colder than the ice in the box. They were here, they had found the box, and now they were inside the garden, outside my house. The scraping sound continued, getting slightly louder, slightly clearer, and then a new sound joined it, a soft, wet sound, squishing like something stepping on damp earth, heavy steps moving across the garden, moving towards the house, towards the back door. I backed away from the stairs, moving slowly, silently into the living room. My eyes were fixed on the door, the hallway, listening, waiting. The sounds from outside were getting louder now, scraping, squelching, and something else. A soft, rustling sound, like fabric or plastic, the back door. I had left it unlocked in my panic to get the box outside. A stupid mistake. A fatal mistake? I didn't know. I just knew they were coming. They were outside, and the door was unlocked. The handle of the back door began to turn very slowly, click by click. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. The door was opening inch by inch, darkness spilling into the house, and then a shape appeared in the doorway, a tall shape, blocking out the faint light from the garden, and the scraping sound. It was inside now, getting closer. The message arrived without warning, a digital ghost in my inbox. It sat there, bold and brash against the usual humdrum of daily emails. Curiosity, that insidious monster, urged a click. Regret followed instantly, a cold wave washing over me as the video loaded. My face, my body, doing things would never do. Disbelief warred with nausea. This could not be real, but it was me, or something that looked exactly like me. The clip ended, looping back to the start, an endless cycle of manufactured horror designed to shock, to disgust, to intimidate. Beneath the video, stark text appeared, a demand, money, silence in exchange for oblivion. Refusal meant exposure, exposure to everyone, family, friends, work, the world. My stomach lurched. Panic began its insidious creep. My hands trembled as I reread the message. The sum requested was enormous, ludicrous, but the threat was terrifyingly real. They had this video, this creation, and they would use it. I looked around my quiet living room, the familiar comfort of my surroundings now tainted, poisoned by the digital venom seeping into my life. Who would do this? Why me? Questions swirled, useless in the face of the immediate, brutal reality. They wanted money, they wanted to control me, and they held the perfect tool to do it. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to delete, to pretend it never happened. But the image from the video flashed again in my mind, the grotesque parody of myself, and the icy grip of fear tightened. I checked my bank balance, a pitiful amount compared to their demand, but there was some savings. Enough to make a dent, maybe. Hope, flimsy and fragile, flickered. If I paid, would it stop? Could I just make this go away? The message contained instructions, anonymous, untraceable, designed for compliance, designed to ensure they remained in control. I hesitated. Paying felt like admitting guilt, like stepping onto a path with no return. But the alternative was unthinkable. The shame, the humiliation, the destruction of everything I had built. My fingers moved against my will, typing, transferring, emptying a significant chunk of my hard-earned money into the digital void. A knot of dread tightened in my chest as the transaction confirmed. Done. I had paid. Silence descended. Digital silence. No immediate confirmation, no acknowledgement, just the empty feeling of my bank account and the lingering horror of the video. Hours crawled by. Each notification on my phone sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Was it them? Was it the start of the nightmare unfolding? I checked social media, compulsively refreshing my profiles, searching for any sign, any hint that the video had been leaked. Nothing, yet. The waiting was excruciating, a torment in itself. Sleep evaded me, every sound in the house amplified, every creak and groan becoming a potential harbinger of disaster. The night stretched on, a long, dark tunnel of fear. Morning arrived, grey and unwelcoming. No messages overnight. A small, tentative sliver of hope emerged. Maybe it was over. Maybe they'd taken the money and gone. Foolish hope. I knew deep down it was not that simple. This was not a one-off transaction. This was the beginning. Work was a blur. Every interaction felt tainted by the secret I carried, the invisible stain threatening to expose itself. I jumped at sudden noises, flinched at unexpected questions. Paranoia became a constant companion, whispering doubts and fears into my ear. The day felt endless, stretching into an unbearable eternity. Then another message, identical sender, same cold, impersonal tone, but the demand was different. Not money this time, something else, something more personal, something intrusive. A task. They wanted me to do something for them, something unsettling, something that made my skin crawl. The threat implicit before was now explicitly stated, compliance or exposure. And the video, they reminded me, was still out there, ready to be unleashed. It was becoming clear. Paying the ransom had not been the end. It had been the price of admission. Desperation clawed at me. Was there any escape? Could I go to the police? But the shame, the public exposure of such a private and humiliating video, it felt impossible. And what if the police couldn't do anything? What if it just made things worse? I was trapped. Caught in a web of digital extortion with no clear path out. Each demand, each message tightened the noose. Their control was absolute. They had my fear, my vulnerability, and they were exploiting it with cruel efficiency. I considered running, disappearing, changing my name, my location, my life. But could I truly escape? The internet was everywhere. The video could follow me, haunt me, no matter where I went, and my family, my friends, they would still be reachable, vulnerable to the fallout. Escape felt like a fantasy, a childish dream in the face of a sophisticated, relentless enemy. I was cornered, and they knew it. I did what they asked. The task was humiliating, degrading. Each step filled me with self-loathing and a sickening sense of violation. But the fear of the video surfacing, of my life collapsing around me, outweighed everything else. I completed the task, sending confirmation as instructed, feeling less like a person and more like a puppet dancing to their strings. Another silence followed, a brief respite in the torment. But this silence felt different. Colder, more ominous. Days turned into weeks, no further messages. A strange calm settled over me. A deceptive peace. Had it ended? Had they finally got what they wanted and moved on? A flicker of hope, smaller and weaker than before, dared to ignite. I started to breathe a little easier, to imagine a future beyond the shadow of the video. Perhaps, just perhaps, I had survived. Then the package arrived. Unexpected, unsolicited. Plain brown paper, no return address. Inside, A USB drive, dread coiled in my stomach, cold and tight. I knew what it was. Without even plugging it in, I knew. More video, but this time, different. Worse. This time it wasn't just me. Others were there too, people I knew, people I cared about, trapped in the same digital nightmare. They had expanded their game and I was still in it, deeper now, more entangled. The screen of the USB drive reflected back at me, a silent, mocking promise of endless horror. The hard floor greeted my face, my head throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse that resonated behind my eyes. Disorientation swam around me, a blurry fog that made it difficult to piece together anything. Blinking, I pushed myself up, sitting on the cold surface. Walls surrounded me, bare and grey. A single metal door, flush with the wall, stood opposite where I sat. No windows, no furniture, just this stark box. Panic tightened in my chest, a cold knot of dread. Where was I? How did I get here? I stood up, my legs shaky and unsteady, and moved towards the door. A handle, cold and unyielding, met my grasp. It wouldn't turn, locked. A wave of alarm washed over me. Trapped. My eyes darted around the room again, searching for anything, any clue. The walls were smooth, featureless, no posters, no markings, nothing to indicate what this place was or why I was inside. The silence was absolute, pressing in on my ears, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. I ran my hands along the walls, desperate for a seam, a crack, anything that might offer a way out. Nothing, just cold, solid grey. I kicked the door, a burst of frustration and fear. It echoed in the small space, a hollow thud that seemed to mock my helplessness. Still locked, then a sound. Not from outside, but from within the room itself, a crackle like static, and then a voice. Distorted, metallic. It filled the space, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke English, but with an accent I couldn't place, twisted and strange. It said I was a participant, a trial. Unethical, it stated plainly, as if reading from a list. My stomach lurched. Human trial. My mind raced back, trying to grasp at memories, at anything that could explain this. Flashes came, online adverts, quick cash, a clinic somewhere anonymous. Medical experiment, they had called it. Stupid. So stupid of me. The voice continued, detailing rules for survival, it stressed. Survival? What sort of experiment was this? It spoke of observation, of progress, of parameters. Words that meant nothing, yet sounded ominous. It warned against deviation, against attempts to escape, against anything other than adherence. Adherence to what? The voice didn't elaborate, it simply finished. The static crackled again, and then silence. The oppressive silence returned, heavier now, charged with a new layer of terror. Survival depended on rules I didn't know, in a trial I never truly understood. I sank back down to the floor, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and panic. What were they doing to me? What did they want? The room suddenly seemed smaller, the grey walls pressing in further. I needed to think, to plan, to find some way out of this nightmare. Ignoring the tremor in my hands, I forced myself to stand again and examine the room methodically. The door was still locked, solid. The walls remained blank. Looking up, I noticed a small grille in the ceiling. A rectangle of metal mesh, too high to reach and likely too small to be of any use even if I could. Hopeless. Despair threatened to engulf me, but I pushed it back. Panicking would achieve nothing. I had to be observant, to look for any detail, any change. And I started pacing the room back and forth, my footsteps the only sound. Each step felt like it was leading me nowhere, trapped in this unending loop of grey walls and silent dread. As I paced, my foot nudged something on the floor, almost hidden against the wall. I stopped, peering down, a small metal square set into the floor. It was almost invisible, blending in with the grey concrete. Curiosity, a sliver of hope, pushed aside some of my fear. I knelt down, examining the square more closely. It had a faint outline, a faint line separating it from the surrounding floor. Could it be some kind of access panel? My fingers traced the edge, searching for a grip, a latch, anything. There, a tiny indentation, almost imperceptible. I pressed my fingernail into it, pushing, pulling, nothing. Frustration mounted again, but I refused to give up. I pressed harder, using my nail to lever at the edge, and then a click. The square moved just slightly, but enough. My heart leapt. It wasn't locked solid, it could be opened. With renewed determination, I worked at the edge of the square, using my fingernails as tools. Slowly, painstakingly, the edge lifted. Dust and grime clung to the metal, undisturbed for what could have been a very long time. Finally, enough of the edge was raised for me to get a proper grip. I pulled, and the square lifted free. A dark hole gaped in the floor, a void beneath. The air from it was cold, stale, and carried a faint metallic smell that made my nostrils twitch. Peering into the hole, I could not see the bottom. It was just dark, an impenetrable blackness. What was down there? Another room? Some kind of service passage? Or just nothingness? Fear warred with a desperate need to escape, to find anything other than this grey box. The voice on the intercom had mentioned rules. Had opening this been against the rules? Would they know? Were they watching? The thought sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. I glanced up at the ceiling grill, paranoia suddenly sharp and acute. Hesitantly, I lowered myself to the edge of the hole, dangling my legs in. The cold air rose up, wrapping around me. It felt damp, almost clammy. Taking a deep breath, I let go, dropping into the darkness. The drop was shorter than expected, just a few feet. I landed on a hard, uneven surface, my ankles twisting slightly. Pain shot up my legs, but I ignored it, scrambling to my feet. Darkness surrounded me, absolute and complete. I could not see my hand in front of my face. The metallic smell was stronger down here, mingled with something else, something faintly organic, unpleasant. My senses strained, trying to detect anything, any sound, any light, any indication of where I was or what was around me. Silence again, but different now. Not the sterile silence of the grey room above, but a deep, heavy silence, the silence of a tomb. A prickling sensation crawled across my skin, the feeling of being watched intensifying in the darkness. Something was here. I could sense it. Not in sight, not in sound, but in the very air itself. I took a tentative step forward, my hands outstretched, feeling blindly in the darkness. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, a wall, perhaps, or something else. I couldn't tell. Moving slowly, inch by inch, I began to explore this new space, this unknown darkness below. A cold dread settled deep within me, heavier than before. The grey room had been terrifying in its stark emptiness. This darkness was something else entirely. It was alive, and I was trapped inside it. The metallic smell intensified, closer now, and then a soft sound from somewhere just beyond my reach in the blackness, a dragging sound, and it was getting nearer. The website surfaced from the internet's underbelly, a shadowed corner of the digital world that felt wrong from the moment I laid eyes on it. Its name, stark and chillingly direct, was The Digital Coffin. A shiver ran down my spine despite the preposterous nature of its claim. It promised an end, a full stop, not just to your online presence, but to everything. It stated in plain lettering that it could erase people from real life. I scoffed, naturally. Cyber nonsense, I assumed. The sort of rubbish that clutters the darker corners of the web. Yet something about the simplicity of the site, its stark white text on a black background, the utter lack of usual internet clutter gave me a strange sensation. I copied the link at once and sent it to Ben, my friend and colleague. He had a similar cynical view of the digital world, and I knew he'd get a laugh out of it. Ben, true to form, chuckled when he clicked the link. We were in the office kitchen, mugs of tea in hand, taking a morning break. He scrolled through the website, reading the outlandish claims aloud in a dramatic voice, complete with mock horror gasps. We both agreed it was ridiculous. Probably some elaborate scam, or perhaps just a very strange art project gone too far. Imagine, Ben said, still chuckling, actually believing this stuff. He typed something into the search bar on the site. Let's see if anyone's dumb enough to use it, he said, a grin spreading across his face. He paused, then typed his own name. The page refreshed. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a single word appeared in bold, stark letters. Processing. We both stared at the screen, still amused, but a tiny seed of something else started to sprout in my mind. It was illogical, of course, but the bare simplicity of the website, the immediate and oddly sterile response, began to unsettle me in a way I couldn't quite explain. We finished our tea, the conversation drifting to other, more sensible topics. Ben was still joking about the digital coffin as we walked back to our desks, but his laughter seemed a little less buoyant now. The word processing stayed on my mind throughout the morning. It was just a word, a computer term for something happening in the background, but paired with the website's outlandish claim, it gained a sinister edge. Lunchtime came, and Ben and I usually went to the cafe down the street. I went to his desk to see if he was ready. His chair was empty. I assumed he was already downstairs grabbing a table. I went down to the cafe, scanned the tables, but no Ben. Odd, he was always punctual, especially when food was involved. I sent him a text, no reply. I called his mobile. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. This was unusual. Ben never ignored his phone, particularly not at lunchtime. I started to feel a prickle of worry. Perhaps he had a sudden appointment, but he would have said something. I went back to the office, checked his desk again. Everything was normal. His jacket was on the back of his chair, his bag under the desk, his computer was off, which was also unlike him. He usually just locked it when he stepped away. Something felt different now, a subtle shift in the office atmosphere, almost imperceptible but undeniably there. I went back to my own desk and looked at my computer screen. The link to the digital coffin was still open in a tab. Against my better judgment, I clicked back to it. The home page loaded. I navigated back to the search function. Just out of curiosity, I typed Ben's name again. This time, the response was different. Instead of processing, the page displayed 2 words, user erased. My blood ran cold. It was ridiculous. It had to be. It was some sort of sick joke, a website designed to scare people, but the missing lunch, the unanswered calls, the strange feeling, it all coalesced into a knot of dread in my stomach. I tried to dismiss it, to reason with myself. Ben was probably fine. He was probably held up or his phone battery died. There were a million sensible explanations. User erased was just a website prank, meaningless words on a screen. But the words vibrated in my mind, dark and insistent. I tried calling Ben again, still voicemail. I texted him again, asking if he was all right, telling him I was getting worried. No reply. The afternoon crawled by. I couldn't concentrate on work. My thoughts kept drifting back to Ben, to the website, to those 2 words. User erased. The office seemed quieter than usual, or perhaps it was just my perception, my senses heightened by a mounting anxiety. People moved around, typed on keyboards, talked on the phone, but it all seemed distant, muffled. The world felt like it had taken on a slightly different hue, a shade darker, a degree colder. As the afternoon wore on, the feeling intensified. It wasn't just worry now. It was something deeper, something akin to icy fear. 5 o'clock arrived, the end of the workday. People started packing up, chatting about their evening plans. I waited, hoping Ben would walk in, late but present, with a mundane explanation for his absence. He didn't. The office emptied out, leaving just a handful of us behind. I stayed at my desk, staring at the screen, the digital coffin website still open, a digital sore thumb against the mundane backdrop of office software. I tried Ben's number again, one last time, voicemail. I sent another text, a more urgent one now, asking him to call me, telling him I was really concerned. Still nothing. I went to Ben's desk. It was exactly as he had left it, jacket on the chair, bag under the desk. His computer was still off. It was starting to feel wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong. Ben was reliable, predictable. He wouldn't just vanish, not without a word, not without his jacket, his bag, his phone. I felt a growing sense of panic, a cold wave washing over me. I called his home number. It rang and rang, no answer. I checked his social media. No new posts, no activity since the previous day. It was like he had simply ceased to exist. I went home, the knot of fear twisting tighter with each step. My flat felt empty and silent. I switched on all the lights, trying to banish the growing darkness that seemed to be creeping in from the edges of my vision. I made myself dinner but couldn't eat. I sat in front of the television, flipping channels, but nothing held my attention. My mind was stuck on Ben, on the website, on those chilling words, user erased. I went back to my laptop, opened the digital coffin website again. The stark white letters on the black screen seemed to pulse now, to vibrate with a sinister energy. I scrolled through the site, searching for any clue, any explanation. There was nothing, just the same minimalist design, the same unsettling promise. I decided to try something. With trembling fingers, I typed my own name into the search bar. I hesitated for a moment, a cold certainty gripping me, but I pressed enter. The page refreshed, and the single word appeared in bold, stark letters, just as it had for Ben. Processing. I stared at the word, frozen, the blood draining from my face. The room seemed to spin, the lights to dim. A profound and icy dread filled me, a sense of utter helplessness. I wanted to close the laptop, to run, to scream, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a terror so complete it stole my breath. I sat there in the growing silence of my flat, the single word on the screen burning into my vision. The feeling of dread intensified, becoming almost unbearable, and then the lights went out. The flashing blue lights filled the room, reflecting off the walls, bouncing onto the ceiling. A pounding noise echoed against the thin wood of the front door, each strike vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. Panic tightened in my chest, a cold knot twisting inside me. I opened the door, the bright porch light blinding after the dim interior. Two uniformed figures stood there, their faces serious, unreadable. One held out a piece of paper. The word warrant jumped out at me, stark black letters against the white. My name was typed at the top. Confusion warred with the rising tide of fear. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't done anything. The words blurred as I tried to read the document properly, something about fraud, something about multiple counts. It made no sense. They stepped inside, their presence filling the small space, making it feel smaller, constricting. They spoke in clipped, official tones, explaining procedures, reciting rights, but the words swam around me, meaningless. My mind raced, trying to catch up, to understand. Fraud? Me? It was absurd. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking, intending to call my bank to find out what was happening. A firm hand stopped me. "Not yet," one of them stated, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. They watched every move as I sat heavily on the edge of the armchair, a wave of dizziness washing over me. Disbelief warred with a growing sense of dread. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of mistake, a terrible joke. At the station, the atmosphere was cold, sterile. Strip lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the linoleum floor. The questions began, precise, accusatory. Bank accounts emptied, credit cards maxed out, large sums transferred to unknown locations. The details unfolded, each one a punch to the gut. It sounded like a different person, a criminal, not me. I tried to explain, to protest my innocence, but the words seemed flimsy, inadequate against the weight of the accusations. They showed me bank statements, transactions I didn't recognize, signatures that were almost, but not quite, my own. My medical records flashed up on a screen. Altered, changed, details twisted into something alien. It was like looking at a distorted reflection, a funhouse mirror version of my life. Everything familiar was warped, corrupted. It was me, and yet utterly terrifyingly not me. Released on bail, I stepped out into the night air, blinking against the darkness. The city lights seemed distant, unreal. My flat felt foreign, tainted by the day's events. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside the window made me jump. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails, messages, all demanding payment, all addressed to me, but for debts I hadn't incurred. The next morning brought no relief. The bank confirmed my accounts were drained. My credit was ruined. My life as I knew it was gone. Desperation clawed at me. I had to prove it wasn't me, that this was some elaborate, cruel hoax. But how? Where to even begin? Days blurred into a frantic search for answers, endless phone calls, fruitless online forms, dismissive responses from officials. No one seemed to listen, to believe. To them, I was a fraudster, a criminal. The evidence, however fabricated, was stacked against me. I was trapped in a nightmare, watching my life crumble around me piece by piece. Then came the news reports, a string of burglaries across the city, shops broken into, homes ransacked. The description given by witnesses, played on the radio, printed in the papers, was chilling. A man matching my description, same height, same build, same age. My name, they said, was given at one location. My name associated with these crimes. A cold dread settled deep in my bones. Someone was doing this. Someone was using my stolen identity to destroy me, systematically, deliberately. It wasn't random, it was targeted, it was personal. But I had no idea why. Who would do this? And what did they want? The fear intensified, morphing into a primal terror. It wasn't just about money or records anymore, it was about my very existence. This other me was out there, walking around, acting in my name, committing crimes in my city. Each act further solidified the false identity, burying the real me deeper and deeper. I started looking over my shoulder constantly. Every stranger felt like a potential threat. Every shadow seemed to conceal hidden eyes. I became a ghost in my own life, watching from the sidelines as someone else wore my face, used my name, and dismantled everything I had built. One evening, walking home, I noticed a figure across the street. He paused under a streetlight, the light illuminating his face. My blood ran cold. It was me. Or someone who looked exactly like me, the same features, the same hair, the same expression in the eyes. It was uncanny, a mirror image walking the streets. He turned his head, glancing directly in my direction. For a moment our eyes met. There was no recognition there, no hint of shared identity, just a cold, blank stare. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood frozen, rooted to the spot, watching him go. The chill deepened, a profound, bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the evening air. He was out there, somewhere in the city, living my life or a twisted version of it, and I was left here, a shadow, adrift in the ruins of my own stolen existence. The warrant was still active, the charges were still pending, and somewhere out there he was still walking free. A small brown package landed through the letterbox. No name, no address, just a plain box. Inside, nestled on a bed of shredded paper, sat a flash drive, black, unmarked, and cold to the touch. It had arrived from an online marketplace, one of the darker corners of the web. I plugged it into my computer. A thrill of anticipation mixed with a little bit of dread. My channel was all about true crime, but usually I dealt with cases safely wrapped in the past. This was different. This felt like poking something alive. Files popped up on the screen, folders with random letters and numbers for names. I clicked on the first. A video file simply titled 1. The screen flickered to life. Grainy footage, shaky, handheld, a street at night, poorly lit. Nothing seemed to be happening, just parked cars and empty pavements. Then a sudden quick action just at the edge of the frame, too quick to make out properly. The video cut to black, short, pointless. Or was that the point? I opened the next file. 2. Another street scene, nighttime again, similar quality, shaky camera. This time the focus was on a doorway. Minutes passed on screen, nothing, then a door opened, someone came out, and then in a split second something else happened, a blur of activity. The camera jolted downwards, capturing only paving stones for a moment before cutting out. Again, brief, confusing, unsettling. Was this some kind of art project, some weird student film? It didn't have the feel of fiction, it felt real, too real. File 3. This one made my stomach tighten before I even clicked play. The thumbnail was just a block of dark green. The video opened on complete darkness, then a faint light source appeared, moving slightly. A torch beam, perhaps? It scanned across a room, or what looked like a room. Bare walls, dusty floor. Then the beam settled on something in the corner, something bundled up. It was hard to make out at first, then the torch moved fractionally and a shape became clearer, a person, tied up, motionless. The torch beam stayed fixed on the figure for what felt like a very long time before the video ended abruptly. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't right. This was definitely not right. I clicked on 4 with trembling fingers, more darkness to begin with. Then a different location, indoors again, but this time it was brighter, almost too bright. Harsh fluorescent lighting, a room that resembled a storeroom, shelves lining the walls, mostly empty. In the center of the room, another person, standing, facing away from the camera. They didn't move. The camera stayed focused on their back for an extended period. Then a hand reached into the frame, holding something shiny. A knife. The hand moved towards the person's back. The video cut. My heart was pounding now. My hands were clammy. This wasn't fake. This couldn't be. The rawness of the footage, the shaky camera, the abrupt cuts, the sense of something terrible unfolding just out of sight. It was too convincing, too disturbing. I wanted to stop. I should stop, but something compelled me to continue. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or a terrible fascination. File 5. Outdoor daytime footage, a park, children playing in the distance, their faint shouts just audible, a path winding through trees. The camera followed the path, moving slowly, almost casually. Then the path turned a corner, and there ahead on a bench was someone sitting. Alone. Reading a book? Innocuous. Normal. The camera kept moving, getting closer to the bench, closer, closer, until it was right behind the person on the bench. So close you could see the pages of their book. Then, again, a hand entered the frame, holding something, a length of rope. Before anything else could happen, the video ended. My mind raced. These weren't just random clips, they were connected, they were escalating. Each one depicting a more brazen and brutal act than the last, and they all had one thing in common. They stopped before the worst of it happened, leaving the true horror to the imagination. But the implication was clear. Terribly clear. Hesitantly, I clicked on 6. Indoor location again, but different. Seemed like a house, a living room, tidy, normal looking, A sofa, a television, pictures on the wall. But something was amiss. An atmosphere, a feeling hanging in the air. Something very wrong. The camera panned around the room, slowly, nothing immediately obvious. Then it settled on a door leading off the living room, a bedroom door perhaps, closed. The camera stayed fixed on the door. For minutes, nothing happened. Just the closed door. The silence in the video was almost deafening. Then a sound, faint, almost imperceptible. A scraping sound, coming from behind the door. The camera zoomed in on the door handle. It began to turn very, very gradually. The video cut to black just as the door started to open. I sat back in my chair, cold sweat prickling my skin. I needed to stop. This was too much. This was going too far. But there was one file left. 7. I stared at it on the screen, my cursor hovering over the play button. Could I? I had to know, didn't I? With a deep breath, I clicked. The video opened, darkness again. Then, slowly, very slowly, light began to creep in, getting brighter, brighter, until I could make out the shape of a window at night. Streetlights outside. The camera was inside a room, pointed directly at a window. My living room window. I recognized the curtains, the street lamp outside. My heart leaped into my throat. This wasn't possible. The camera zoomed in on the window, focusing on the glass. And then, in the reflection, I could see it, behind the camera. A face, masked, eyes staring directly into the lens, into me, and then the video stopped. Just cut off. Black screen. But the image in the reflection remained, burned into my mind. The masked face just behind the camera in my room, filming me. My fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling faster than anyone could read. Payment was good, very good for this job. They wanted access, deep access, into a site locked tighter than a drum, they said. Encrypted auction house, they called it. I expected drugs, maybe stolen gems, something boringly illegal. What I found was far beyond that, a darkness I could never have imagined. The firewall cracked like an eggshell under my digital tools. I was in. The interface was stark, metallic grey with minimal text. No fancy banners or flashing adverts, just listings, lots of them, each one presented like any normal online auction. But the categories were strange. Acquisitions, removals, indenture. I clicked on acquisitions, thinking maybe art or historical items. The first listing made my stomach lurch. A photograph. A young woman, eyes wide with terror, bound and gagged. The description was brief, cold. Asset acquisition, female, Eastern European. No questions, guaranteed delivery. The current bid was astronomical. My blood ran cold. This wasn't art, this wasn't jewels, this was people. I clicked back, my hands shaking now. Removals. I dared to open it. A grainy image, a man standing on a street corner, unaware. Removal target. Male, financial analyst, discreet solution provided. Full confidentiality. The bidding was even higher than before. My breath hitched. Discreet solution. That wasn't kidnapping. That was something final. My fingers trembled as I navigated to indenture. I almost didn't want to click, but a morbid curiosity pulled me in. This section was perhaps the most sickening. Pictures of people, young and old, faces etched with despair. Indentured servant, male, culinary skills, loyalty guaranteed through bespoke conditioning. Indentured companion, female, multilingual, discretion assured, compliant nature. These weren't services, these were lives being sold. People treated as commodities, stripped of everything. I had to get out. This wasn't a job anymore. It was something evil. I typed the command to sever connection, wanting to wipe my hands clean, to pretend I'd never seen this place, but a message flashed on the screen, blocking my exit. Account locked, initiating security protocol. Panic surged. I triggered something. They knew I was here. I tried to close the window to shut down my system, but nothing responded. The screen remained fixed, that chilling message pulsing in red. Another notification appeared, this time a link. Security breach detected. Assessment in progress. Subject profile generated. I didn't click it. I didn't want to know. I wanted to vanish, to disappear and forget any of this happened. But I was trapped. My system was frozen. I was at their mercy. The link pulsed, a malevolent invitation. Hesitantly, fear making my hand clumsy, I clicked. A new page loaded. My face stared back at me. A photo taken from my webcam, grainy and unflattering. Underneath was a profile, details scraped from somewhere, from everywhere. My name, my age, my skills, my location, everything laid bare. It was my hacker profile, the one I used for freelance gigs. They knew everything. The title above the profile made my blood freeze solid. Auction item profile. Below my picture was a description written in the same cold, detached tone as the others. Asset designation, information specialist. High value due to unique skill set in digital penetration and data extraction, adaptable and discreet. Potential applications include corporate espionage, security system circumvention, and bespoke information retrieval. They were auctioning me just like the others. I was an item for sale. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was no longer just a hacker, I was prey. They hadn't just locked me out, they had pulled me in. I scrolled down the page, my heart pounding in my chest. Bid history. Current highest bid. Reserve price met. The auction was live. People were bidding on me. For what? Servitude? Exploitation? Something far worse? I didn't want to imagine. The countdown clock ticked relentlessly towards 0. Auction ending soon. The bids were escalating rapidly, numbers flashing, climbing higher and higher. Who were these people? What did they want with me? Images of the faces from the other listings flashed in my mind. The terror, the despair. Was that my future? To be bought and sold, my skills twisted for someone else's dark purposes. The seconds dwindled. My breath hitched in my throat. I was powerless, a spectator at my own auction, watching my fate being decided by unseen bidders in the shadows. The screen flashed again. Auction concluded. Winner announced in 3, 2, 1. A new name appeared on the screen. Just a username, anonymous, impenetrable. Void_King. Void King had won. Void King now owned me. The screen went black. My system remained unresponsive, locked, controlled by someone, somewhere. I sat in the silence of my room, the darkness pressing in, listening to the faint hum of my computer, no longer mine. The door to my flat clicked open.